Hello, welcome to our Introduction to Personality Theory course, and we continue. In this video, we're starting to discussing a new domain in personality psychology. This domain is called cognitive experiential domain. So in this and the next video, we will discuss the following topics. What cognitive domain of personality psychology is about, like general overview. How perception can be connected to personality characteristics, what is the link between them, how our interpretation of events around us influence our personality, how our goal-oriented behavior connected with our personality, intelligence and personality. Intelligence is also one of the maybe most important factors determining our personality. Emotions and personality, happiness, anxiety, depression, and hostility. And finally, emotional style. In this video, we'll focus on first four bullet points, and in the next video, we'll cover last 4 points. So let's start with a cognitive experiential domain general overview. Obviously, the main concept here would be the concept of cognition. How can we define it? So cognition is a general term referring to awareness and thinking, as well as to specific mental acts such as perceiving, attending to, interpreting, remembering, believing, judging, deciding, and anticipation. So in this sense, cognition is an umbrella term which includes all the cognitive functions we have. Main cognitive functions are usually categorized as thinking, language, perception, attention, and memory. More simple definition provided by Wikipedia. Cognition is a mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and senses. So in this domain, psychologists try to focus on cognitive functions and cognitive processes, thinking that the way how we understand, interpret, and think about ourselves and reality around us determines our personality. So it's different idea because in intrapsychic domain, psychologists mostly were focused on past experiences and motivations of people, and we're supposing that it's the primary factors determining our personality. In this domain of knowledge, psychologists also focus on intrapsychic realities, but try to underline the importance of cognitive factors in the forming of our personalities. So not surprisingly, the research on cognition started with the emergence of so-called cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology starts to develop in 1960s, so around 60 years ago. It was the last from major schools of thought in psychology. And basically, ideas of cognitive psychology were based on ideas of neo-behaviorism, with this idea of intervening variables. So between stimulus and reaction, psychology should study intervening variables. Gestalt psychology, because a lot of Gestalt psychologists immigrated from Germany because of Nazis and settled down in the United States, where they started to exchange ideas with behaviorists, and behaviorism was the primary school of thought in American academic psychology. And the last source of influence on cognitive psychology, of course, were first computers and cybernetics. So basically in 1960s, people start to build first big computers. They were like really, really big. The room size or even bigger. But even those first computers allowed scientists to calculate more complicated data and also allowed to conduct new types of experiments and new procedures. For example, with advent of computers, scientists could show pictures to participants for several milliseconds, which was impossible without computer because human reaction speed is much slower and experimenter couldn't show and remove pictures with that speed. Those just technical opportunities opened a lot of space for conducting new experiments in the field of perception, attention, and memory, which eventually led to new discoveries. So those new technical devices and advent of the computers actually allowed psychologists to conduct more complicated and interesting research-designed experiments. So initially, cognitive psychologists studied cognitive processes using so-called cognitive metaphor. Basically, they tried to compare human brain with a computer, right? Brain also processes information and stores information and uses it the same as computer. And early cognitive psychologists were inspired by this computer metaphor and tried to use this to explain how human cognition works. But eventually, cognitive psychologists started to think more broadly and started to research not only cognitive processes, but emotions, personality, and all other phenomena in psychology. And while initially cognitive psychologists were mostly focused on fundamental research, after 1980s, actually cognitive psychologists started to focus on different practical applications, which can vary from usability research on how to create better interfaces for computers and cell phones up to cognitive psychotherapy. Speaking about researchers in this field, one of the most famous cognitive psychologists was Herman Witkin, American psychologist who conducted research on so-called cognitive styles. His first book was published in 1954, even before the cognitive psychology emerged as like holistic school of thought in psychology. And basically, he tried to find individual differences between people in how they perceive information. So cognitive style, if we will try to get a formal definition, is a person characteristic mode of perceiving, thinking, remembering, and problem solving. So people are different, and the way how they perceive and think and interpret information is also different, the ways how they do it. So if we will research those possible cognitive styles, it can be an important insight on individual differences in this cognitive domain. This is actually what Herman Witkin did, and he found two major cognitive styles, which he called field independency and field dependency. So one of his first tests on those cognitive styles looked like as it represented on this slide. So on the top of the picture, you can see different shapes. And at the bottom of the page, you can see some figures. The task of the participant was to quickly find figures from upper row in the figures from lower. Actually, it's not that easy. And some people could find those figures for a longer period of time, but some people actually surprisingly performed quite quickly. So they could find those figures very quickly. And Herman Witkin found that there are two groups of people based on the performance in this task, and he calls them field dependency and field independence. So field dependence is a cognitive style in which the individual consistently relies more on external reference, so-called environmental cues, than on internal reference body sensation cues. Basically, people with field dependence rely more on the context of the situation, and pay more attention to that. Field independence is a cognitive style in which the individual consistently relies more on internal reference, basically their bodily sensation, and pay much less attention to environmental cues or the context. So field-independent people tend to be able to disregard deceptive environmental clues, unneeded context, and they perform quite well on finding elements of figures of objects, even if they presented in very detailed contexts. So later, Witkin and his colleagues found that field dependence and independence as primary cognitive styles actually correlate with certain personality characteristics. For example, field-dependent people tend to rely on social information more and frequently ask other people for their opinions to get more environmental cues and contexts. They're attentive to social cues and in general are oriented toward other people. They show strong interest in others and prefers to be physically close to other people and gravitate towards social situations, which is actually interesting because where is cognitive style and where is social behavior? And surprisingly, they're interconnected, and this connection is actually quite logical. Field-independent people, on the other hand, function with more autonomy and display a more impersonal or detached orientation toward others, so they rely more on their bodily sensations and their own opinion. And because of that, they are not so focused on other people's opinions and keep their distance with others, preferring non-social situations. It does not necessarily connect it with extroversion and introversion, so please do not confuse it. But basically, because of how cognition works, some people rely more on the context, including social context, while other people show more autonomy. One style is not better than another, they're just different and allow people to perform well in different types of settings and situations. So many studies of this perceptual style, cognitive style of field dependence and independence, show that people with field dependency and independency prefer a bit different learning strategies. For example, field-independent individuals have good selective attention. So they can omit unnecessary information from the context and focus exactly on what's needed. So because of that, they actually perform quite well, even in the situation with strong distractions. Field-dependent individuals tend to process information in chunks and are good at seeing connections among categories. So maybe their attention is not that well, but they understand the bigger picture, and it can be their strengths. All right, so another area that requires skill at seeing patterns and organizing information, including making generalization, is learning a second language, which actually quite a hot topic for many students and professors as well. So learning a second language is a complicated task. So studies identified that field-independent individuals making better progress than feel dependent individuals when learning a second language. So why? Let's try to understand this. One study looked at Canadian university students learning English as a second language. The study concluded that field independent people have an easier time acquiring a second language, most likely because they're better able to perceive patterns within a complex stream of information. Right, so when we learn foreign second language, it's like huge amount of information, right? Very hard to understand on which aspects of this information you should focus, including all those rich social contexts which stand behind any language, right? So field-independent people, because of their better like attention focus on like exact pieces of information, actually kind of overcome this chaos a bit faster and a bit better than field-dependent people. So probably this is the explanation of this correlation, which is actually quite interesting. So basically, as I said before, it doesn't necessarily means that one style is better than another. They just have different strengths and weaknesses. Field-independent people skillful at analyzing complex situations, extracting information from background instructions. They often more creative, but field-dependent people, on the other hand, have much better social skills. And it's also an important factor of success. So it's always good when field-dependent and field-independent people collaborate with each other and help each other so they can share their strengths, not always to compete. Another interesting area of research was started by Anaset Petria, and she studied pain tolerance and sensation reducing augmented. So she studied people in hospitals undergoing painful operation, as well as normal subjects with whom she just induced pain, right? People at hospitals suffer from different disease and disorders. Sometimes they experience a lot of pain, unfortunately, and they need some anesthesia and painkillers, and different people have different pain tolerance. So some people actually cope with their pain much better than others. So she developed a series that people with low pain tolerance, so basically, I don't know, you have a very small cut and you're already feeling super hurt, had a nervous system that amplified the subjective impact of sensory cues. So basically, nervous system makes your sensation stronger. That's why you're like super focused on those sensations. And because of that, it's very hard for you to tolerate pain. In contrast, people who tolerate pain quite well have a nervous system which reduces sensations. So for them, it's actually easier not to be focused on these sensations and tolerate the pain. So it's an interesting theory about this possible personality characteristic as pain tolerance, which might be connected with individual psychophysiological differences. So people who high on pain tolerance, or so-called reducers, have found to drink more coffee, smoke more, and have a lower threshold for boredom compared with augmenters. So because the kind of nervous system reduces sensation, they seek more substances and activities which bring them more sensations and make them more strong, make them stronger, so they will feel something. So that's why they probably more frequently consume psychoactive drugs and listen loud music compared to people with more sensitive nervous system. So those reducers tend to start smoking at earlier age and engage in more minor delinquencies as adolescents compared with augmenters. So this is an interesting source of possible personality differences connected with sensation seeking, which we discussed in previous lectures, including dispositional and biological domains. So reducers might use substances just lift their arousal level to compensate their reduced sensory activity. Maybe this is the reason they just to feel the same amount of like sensations and intensity as augmenters, they need to get some sort of doping for that. Another theory in this domain is so-called personal construct theory, created by George Kelly. So George Kelly was born to a religious family of farmers in Kansas, in the United States of America. He had a bachelor's degree in physics and mathematics initially, and master's degree in sociology. So he couldn't find his major for a long time, a problem typical for many students. He studied at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where he received a bachelor degree in pedagogy. So it was his third degree already. He loved to study. And finally, he received doctorate degree in psychology from the University of Iowa. During World War II, he worked as an aviation psychologist and helped to train pilots for the United States Army to fight Nazis and fascists in Europe. And eventually, he served as the president of clinical and advisory divisions of the American Psychological Association. It's actually quite an honorable title. Unfortunately, as you can see, Kelly died quite young. He was only 62 years old. But his theory of personal constructs is considered to be one of the most famous theories in cognitive experiential domain of studying personality. And his background in physics and mathematics probably heavily influenced how he understood cognition and personality. So according to Kelly, one of the primary motivations of people is to seek explanation for the events in their lives. So basically, all people are kind of scientists who try to find explanation for phenomena in laboratory. We just do the same with real life on everyday basis. So scientists use scientific constructs to explain reality or concepts, but common people use personal constructs. It's also concepts, but they're not scientific and not necessarily have clear formal definition, but we use those constructs or categories to explain what happens around us, and we usually form them based on our life experience, not based on our formal education. A personal construct is an abstract concept or generalization from previous experience, a classification, and evaluation standard created by a person and verified by her in her like his own experience. Basically, a generalization of our life experience, which we verified applying in different life situations. A mandatory property of any personal construct is the presence of two opposite poles, or so-called bipolarity. The pole of similarity is activated when two objects, phenomena, or people compared and similar, right? So, for example, you have a concept of personal construct of intelligence. What is to be intelligence, right? You compare different people and you find those two people are similar. For example, they're equally smart or equally not smart, right? So you suppose they're similar. And the pole of contrast compared when you compare objects, situations, events, or people, and you find that they are different. So for example, to create a construct of intelligence, of like being smart, you need to have an opposite pole of, like, for example, being stupid, or what you suppose is opposite to being intelligent, right? So that's why all personal constructs have this pole of similarity and pole of contrast. Without that, it just doesn't work. All personal constructs have certain characteristics or properties. The first one is like, does your construct predict and explain events? So we try to form constructs which predict more and explain more events, because in this sense, if you have such a construct, you consider this as a valuable construct which helps you in your everyday life activities, because it predicts and explains a lot. Focus of applicability is like where you can apply your construct, right? Some constructs can be applied in a narrow amount of situations, whereas some constructs imply a broad application. And third characteristic is applicability range. So how many events can be explained by one construct? Different situations, and like how many situations you can explain with the same construct. So according to Kelly, your personality development is connected with development of constructs. So how many constructs you have, and how well they explain and predict everything around you. So people experience desire to evaluate their contrast and check the correctness of their interpretation. So we like to explain things around us and predict, and we really feel a lot of satisfaction when our predictions and explanations are accurate, right? When we check it. And we get upset when our predictions and explanations are wrong and we do not understand what is happening and why. So then we change constructs if they're not effective. So if you try to explain what is happening and predict the situation, and your explanation doesn't work, you eventually start to change your constructs, because you don't like to be in unpredicted, unexplainable situations. You experience anxiety and dissatisfaction because of that. And people experience desire to expand the range and scope of their constructs. So the more events you can predict and explain is better. So people not only want to have several correct constructs, they also want to expand the amount and the quality of those constructs to be able to predict and explain more and more possible situations. So and this leads to a well-developed repertoire of social roles. Basically, if you have very well-developed system of constructs, you can be more successful in more social situations, which helps you to perform your social roles better, like being a better student, being a better parent, being a better employee, being a better citizen, and so on. That's basically it. Another quite interesting theory which I want to tell you in this video is so-called locus control theory. This concept of locus of control was introduced by Julian Rotter. So basically, locus of control is a construct that is used to categorize people's basic motivational orientations and perceptions of how much control they have over the conditions of their life. So something happens with you and people around you, and you try to explain why it happens, and do you have a control can you actually influence and change what is happening, or it's beyond your capabilities? So people with so-called an external locus of control tend to behave in response to external circumstances, and they perceive their life outcomes as arising from factors out of their control. So people with external locus of control don't feel that they can influence many things, and they suppose that their life is determined by external situations like weather, the phase of economic cycle, big corporations, other people, and so on. So they don't feel that level of control. People with internal locus of control, on the opposite, try to think that they can do something and they can influence and they control something, and they focus on things they can influence. And in this sense, they rely more on themselves and they exercise their agency much more often. This is basic difference. So Julian Rotter created some tests which measure those external and internal locus of control. And later research showed that this explanation style, this locus of control, actually correlates with many other personality characteristics. For example, internal locus of control has been found to be predictive of a variety of real-world outcomes. For example, people who displayed an internal locus of control at age 10, so early in their childhood, had reduced risk of obesity at the age of 30, right? So it's a long-term prediction. In another study of university students, internal locus of control, people completed their degrees on more timely matters than students with external locus of control, right? And it's logical because those people think I influence the situation, I control myself, I control my time, I can do something even if my schedule is too busy, I will be working. So they try to find the ways how they can influence the situation, and they finish on time, while people with external locus of control focus, oh, it's so busy, everything is happening, there is not much I can do, right? And that influences their performance. Another interesting study showed that adults with a more internal locus of control had higher credit ratings. Again, more feeling of agency, better self-control leads to more responsible behavior with debt, and thus higher credit scores, which is also interesting, right? So this locus of control connected with health and finances and education and many other areas of our life. Partly closely connected with those locuses of control is the concept of learned helplessness. This concept was introduced by Bruce Overmyer and Martin Seligman. In many later texts, some why people do not cite Bruce Overmyer, but he contributed the same as Martin Seligman, so it would be fair to cite both of them. Basically, learned helplessness is a phenomenon in which repeated exposure to uncontrollable stressors results in individuals failing to use any control options that may later become available. So basically, you come through a lot of stress, which you cannot control. You cannot do anything with that. You just need to tolerate. But when the situation changes and you actually can control and reduce the stress, you already don't see this opportunity and you don't do anything with this opportunity because you learned how to feel helplessness and lack of agency. So this phenomenon was described first time almost 60 years ago in 1967 in their joint research. So actually learned helplessness can be observed both in people and animal. And it leads to many, many negative consequences. So people with learned helplessness actually have a lot of psychological issues and negative life outcomes, and they need additional help because, again, as follows from the formal definition, even if the new opportunity presented to them to change their lives, they don't feel that they actually can do something. They don't believe in themselves, and they lose agency, which is actually quite sad. So learned helplessness partly connected with locus of control and so-called explanatory styles, the ways how we explain and interpret what happens around us, what is the cause of certain events. For example, you got late to the class. Why? How do you explain it to you? Because it was a traffic jam, an external factor, or because you were not responsible enough, internal factors, right? You can use different explanations to what happens with you and with other people. So people can naturally have different explanatory styles. For example, internal, external, how you explain what is the cause of events, right? Internal factor, for example, I'm not very responsible, that's why I got late. Or external, something happened on the road, and that's why I couldn't come on time. It's just external situations. Stable or unstable. So is the cause I see is like one time situation. So, for example, traffic jam can be just today I just wasn't lucky enough, but in other on other day everything would be different. Or it's just stable. For example, personality characteristic, I'm not very responsible, is more stable characteristic, right? It's hard to change. And final, global or specific, right? So does this cause influence many situations, or it influence only that specific situation, only this time, this day, right? So explanatory styles that most puts a person at risk for feelings of helplessness is pessimistic explanatory style. So it's internal, stable, and global causes for bad events. So if something bad happens, it's because of me. It always be like that, stable, and it will persist in almost all situations I encounter. So it's internal, stable, and global, right? If you explain everything in this style, it's actually quite depressive. So that's why it's called pessimistic explanatory style, and it leads to learned helplessness, actually. So opposite style is so-called optimistic explanatory style, emphasizes external, temporary, and specific causes for bad events, right? Yeah, something bad happened, but it just was a bad luck. It's temporary, it's only for today. In this situation, everything else would be nice and good and beautiful, and I just need to skip it and everything else would be nice, right? It's more optimistic. So people with optimistic explanatory style suffer from learned helplessness much less than people with this pessimistic explanatory style. So basically here on the slide, you can see a summary of those two styles, like here it's optimistic style, on the top, external, so external, unstable, and specific, right? So my girlfriend broke up with me because her parents forced her. It's not because something wrong with me, it's just parents. Like my girlfriend broke up with me because she needs all her time right now to devote to the charity drive, which only lasts 1 month. So when this will be over, after this month, maybe we will reunite once again. So it's unstable, right? It's just for this month. And specific, my girlfriend broke up with me because she found out I dated Julie last weekend, right? Just because of this situation. So I'm generally okay, I just shouldn't do like that. It's very funny examples, actually. So pessimistic style is different. So Internal. My girlfriend broke up with me because I am from a low-class family. I'm going to college and I have very little ambition in life. Right? It's internal, connected with the personality, life choices, and personal history of this person. Stable. My girlfriend broke up with me because I'm shorter than her, right? You cannot change your height. And global, my girlfriend broke up with me because I'm inconsiderate to timing and faithful jerk, right? So it's your like global characteristic, and who couldn't keep a relationships going in his life dependent, right? So not much space for change, right? So because a person with optimistic style probably will get through this situation faster with lower risk of depression. But a person with pessimistic style on the bottom of this page, right? So probably will have a hard times. So you should pay attention to that. Both of the styles can be not very well connected with the reality, right? So person in the first example with optimistic style actually can be unfaithful jerk, and person with pessimistic style can be very nice person actually. It matters how you explain the reality, not always the reality itself, right? Which actually leads to different consequences with your life, and how you interpret what happens with you sometimes is more important than what actually happens with you. So this is a source of a lot of individual differences. And finally, what we need to cover in this part of the lecture is the concept of self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is belief in one's capabilities to perform. Basically, it's how you perceive your capability to perform in a given setting. If you suppose, I can do this, I can make it, I can get an A plus, for example, in personality psychology, I'm certainly capable of that. You have high self-efficacy. If you think, no, I won't make it, no way, like the best I can get is D, right? It's a low self-efficacy. Again, what is interesting, it doesn't necessarily correspond with your actual capability to perform, right? So it's how you perceive your capability, not your capability. So maybe you actually don't know personality psychology that well on A plus, but maybe also you know it's much better than on D, right? So let's imagine a person capability actually is around like B, right? So, but a person who believes they can perform with higher self-efficacy probably would try a bit longer, try more attempts, and eventually they actually might succeed because of this belief that they can. But a person with the same actual capability but low self-efficacy will give up faster, and their performance eventually can become lower. So this actual like belief in yourself, which is linked with higher self-esteem, and actually can help. So Albert Bandura considered self-efficacy as a primary determinant of emotional and motivational states. In this sense, if you believe that you can do something, it helps you actually to perform better, even if initially your actual capability is not that great. So believing in yourself in certain situations actually can help you eventually perform better. But why? Because you try and train longer, you make more attempts, you don't give up that fast, right? So it's mediated with the amount of training you try. So people with higher self-efficacy try more, and because they try more, they get more experience and they perform better eventually, right? Which is actually quite interesting. In next video, next lecture, we will discuss other factors well researched in this cognitive experiential domain, such as intelligence, emotions, and connection between different emotional states and personality characteristics. Thank you.